Good morning, friends, and welcome to a Hasty Podcast. I'm your demon child, Weston Hasty, and you're listening to a Hasty Podcast. Oh my goodness. Speaking of demon children, I've seen a movie lately. Yeah, that's right. I've seen a movie lately. I had a buddy of mine come up from out of state, and seeing as that was the case, we got together and said screw the coronavid 2020 situation, and I'm gonna go see this man. I haven't seen him in God knows how long, and we're gonna get together, me and a couple buds, and we're all gonna hang out. We're gonna play some games, and we're gonna watch a movie. So that's what I've been up to. I know that this has been the coldest open I have done this entire podcast, by the way. Welcome to the podcast. We've been playing some games. That's exactly what this podcast is going to be about. We've been playing some games. We were playing. What were we playing? I'm going to talk about what we did. We played Call of Duty Blops, the Black Ops one of the Black Ops 2 maybe. I actually forget which one it was. We played some of that. We ate pizza, too much pizza. Ate freaking chips and cookies and crap. Drank too much soda. Had the moonshine. But, all of that aside, we played some Blops, and I'll tell you what, and I want to get into this movie in a little bit, but we played some Blops. I always called it Blops, because it's Black Ops something. Call of Duty Black Ops something or other. It's the one that came out in, friggin' 2012-ish? 2011? 2012? Something like that. This 8-year-old game. The nostalgia trip on this, dude. My buddy and I, we used to play this game all the time back in the day, and it's weird. It's on we play on the PlayStation 3, and it was weird going back to the PlayStation 3 controller because it's so much smaller and lighter compared to that of the PlayStation 4 controller. For all of you out there that have the PlayStation, you know what I'm talking about. The DualShock, when they went to the 4, added that touchpad thing in the middle that just made the controller so much larger and so much heavier. Going back to the PlayStation 3 was like I'm holding this tiny little thing in my hands. And our controllers that we were using, he had one. He had a controller, and I had the rest. We were playing 4-player local, right? We weren't playing online or anything. We were playing 4-player locals. Me and 3 of my buds were playing 4-player local, and my bud had his controller, and it was in fine shape. I had 4 other controllers I brought with me, which was a good move. We only needed 3, but it was good that I brought 4 because one of them did not work. I mean, it worked, but not really. It was pretty busted. But of the 3 that we were using of mine, I was using one that was not super dope. It was constantly trying to make me jump, which told me there was something wrong with the X button, and it was constantly making me reload, which tells me there was something wrong with the square button. So something was not quite going well with those 2 buttons. So I was having quite a difficult time with my controller, these old PlayStation 3 controllers that I don't use anymore, that I don't know how they've been so banged up, but they've been banged up. And we were playing some Blops. It was a good time. We were playing free-for-all. We didn't do any team deathmatch. No, there's no teams. We were out for blood. We were playing some free-for-all. We were playing some gun game. We were playing one in the chamber. If these things aren't completely nostalgic to you, then I don't know what to tell you. Our favorite ritual that we would always do whenever we had players over, at 3-4 players over to play Blops, is that we would play gun game, but we would set it in the excuse me, I'm about to choke to death. Don't mind me. You didn't hear anything. I'm not dying. It's fine. We like to set it so that if you get knifed. See, in gun game, let me explain the rules for those of you that aren't in on the rules, right? In gun game, everybody starts out with 0 points, and everybody starts with the same gun. It's usually some kind of crappy pistol. And every time you get a kill, you go up a point, and you're trying to get to 20 points. It's it's actually technically 200 points because every kill's worth 10 or something like that, or whatever. But you're trying to get 20 kills in a row. And every time you go up a point, you go to a different gun. And everybody has the same lineup of guns, so you kind of know about what score everyone's on just based on the guns that they're using, right? That's the idea of gun game. We always set the rule so that if you knife somebody, if you run up and stab somebody with a knife, that person that you stabbed drops 10 of those points. So you could be at 19 points out of 20, ready to win. You're on the final thing. You're about to win. You're on the final thing. And you get stabbed. You drop back down to 9 points, and you've lost half of all of your progress. That's how we set it. And it's always super intense. And it brought so much nostalgia back to me playing this gun game with all the buds. Man, God, because we would do that. I remember we used to play this. We would play on one map. Nuketown was one of my favorites. We would play on Nuketown, or Hijacked is the one that is on a yacht. Nuketown, for anyone that doesn't know, is like a small neighborhood setup with a bunch of mannequins everywhere. It's a really great map. But we'd play at Nuketown, or we'd play at Hijacked, and we'd play Gun Game, because those are both fairly small maps. And every time anybody got 13, 14, 15 points, the other 3 would gang up on that one person to try to stab them to get them back down. It's a free-for-all. No one's on any teams, but when someone's about to win, it goes straight 3 versus 1, and it's the most tense thing in the world, and we love it because we're so dumb. And trying to stab somebody with a knife gets very finicky. It's not as easy as you'd think it would. You can run right up on somebody. If you try to stab too early, it'll kind of go through the person and won't really count. You go too late, then you walk beyond the person. And of course, the other person you're trying to stab is trying to shoot or stab you back. And it's so stupid when you have 4 players doing this dance of death around each other in the middle of the map, trying to stab at each other and just failing to hit anybody. And it's just the best. And I feel like I had a direction I was going with all of this, but it's the best. The last one, the 19th point before winning, is always this ranged knife. It's like a little projectile knife that you can shoot shoot at people out of a little projector thing. So the very last one is always a knife, but it's not a stabby knife. It's a throwy knife, and it's easy to miss with that. But it's always really intense because I think point 17, I'm trying to remember. No, point 16 is the first time you get a rocket launcher. Point 17 is another rocket launcher. Point 18 is a crossbow, an explosive crossbow. And then point 19 is the knife, the throwing knife. So you always know by the time someone's got a rocket launcher, you know it's go time because it's very easy to kill people with a rocket launcher. It's like, I gotta get in close, I gotta stab this guy. And then people are getting blown up. It's great. Oh, it's so much fun. And that's what we would do. And I remember we would play Gun Game. We could be at Hijacked or at Nuketown on one match for an hour playing Gun Game. We could do that back in the day. I remember, and I think we have had an hour-long match. Maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe not. But again, like I say, every time you get a kill, you go up a point. So if you never get killed or never get stabbed or whatever, you only need to get 20 kills to win. And I think we've reached 100 before, where at least one person's had 100 kills because we're going back and forth, shooting people, stabbing people. We've had 2 people at 190, the 19 points stab each other or something like that, and they go back down to 9, and it's so wild. And that's what we were doing. We were playing some Black Ops 2, and that was just a lot of nostalgia for me. And I want to hear from any of you. You can hit me up at Twitter at Weston Hasty if you want to hit me up about this podcast. We have a hashtag Hasty Podcast. What is your nostalgic multiplayer game with your buds? If you hadn't had a game like that, if you had buds to have a game like that, and then if you did, what was that game? I think the classic one that older folks like to talk about is GoldenEye. I didn't give a crap about GoldenEye. I've played GoldenEye with friends, absolutely, but that was I didn't grow up on that. My nostalgia with playing multiplayer with friends came much later in the console life, but I did play some other James Bond games, between mostly my brother and I. We would play a lot. We didn't have a lot of friends over to play the James Bond ones I had. I had Nightfire, From Russia with Love. Another one GoldenEye. No, not GoldenEye. Not GoldenEye. What was the one? Maybe it was a version of GoldenEye. What was the one with it was the first time in a James Bond game you could dual wield weapons, and you didn't play as James Bond. You played as this defunct MI6 agent that in a simulation accidentally got James Bond killed, so you got kicked out of MI6. And then you end up working for the villains. Was that Gold something? Gold finger? Gold eye? Gold arm? Gold something? You'd play that game akimbo with 2 weapons. I don't remember what the name of that game was, but I had that one. You play as the villain. I don't remember what that was called. It was for the PlayStation 2. But yeah, I just remember playing a lot of Call of Duty, Black Ops 2, and Modern Warfare 3 and 2 with a bunch of buds. That's kind of my nostalgic shooter multiplayer game, honestly. Yeah. Let me know what yours is. I want to know. Could you tell me? But I just wanted to share that with you, that I played that and had so much fun. And it was so ridiculous getting used to those controls all over again, shooting with R1 instead of right trigger and that kind of thing. That was just a riot. Coffee break. Sorry for the interruption, but I would like to tell you about today's sponsor, Anchor. What's Anchor, you ask? Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. So easy, in fact, that yours truly uses it. Anchor is free and easy to use. You can record and edit your entire podcast from your phone on Anchor's app or on your computer on Anchor.fm. What's more, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so that it is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and several other platforms. And once your podcast is up and running, you can begin making money from your podcast using Anchor's tools with no minimum listenership required. It's everything you need to make your podcast right now. Want to begin? Start by downloading the free Anchor app or go to Anchor.fm to get started. Okay, coffee break over. But I also want to share with you, we played that for a while. And as much fun as it is to talk about Blops, it came out almost a decade ago, right? Old news, old stuff. As much as I would like to talk about it, I got to spend a little bit of time talking about this movie we watched. It's, I don't even know how to pronounce it. Niza? I think it's like Neja. I'll spell it for you. N-E space Z-H-A. All right? It's a movie. We're flipping through Netflix, right? My buddy, Justin, he's flipping through Netflix. He picks out this movie. He's like, this looks interesting. We were watching the trailer to this movie. The trailer to this movie on Netflix, right? Is this small infant child standing up, catching on fire. It's an animated movie, so don't worry, don't panic. It's a small animated infant child rising up from the ground, set ablaze and on fire, and throwing fireballs into this local Japanese village. And that's the trailer. I don't have any idea. Watching the trailer, I had no idea what this movie was going to be. And Justin's flipping through and he's like, this looks interesting. We're watching this. It's like, okay, we're watching this. And oh my God, I don't know how to explain how I feel about the movie, because it is a Chinese film, originally. It's dubbed in English. You can watch it dubbed in English. Just be aware that it's dubbed. So if you see that the lips aren't quite matching up with the words coming out, it's because it is dubbed if you watch it in English. It is originally in Chinese. I wasn't sure what it was in originally. We had to look this up later. We had a guess. The further into it you got, the more okay, I think it's Chinese. But the art style and animation are so close. This was a wild ride of a film. The art style and animation look so close to being bad in ways that I can't explain. It looks like a movie that if you're in the West, if you're a Western movie viewer and you've seen a lot of animated films, you'd be like, oh, all the really bad animated films kind of have this look to them. If it's a 3D computer animated film, you kind of know that weird plasticky look to characters, right? That sort of stiff plastic look. This film has that similar art style, but it is more detailed. So it's got that sort of it almost looks like plastic until you see them in animation, until you see them moving. And then you realize there's nothing stiff about it, that the animation is actually really well done. But for some reason, the art style just kept screaming in my head, this should be bad. If you see the promotional material, a poster or something for this movie, it doesn't look like the art's going to be bad at all. It's because they took 2 of the prettiest looking characters in the movie as they're marketing. But when you get introduced to the movie, you're like, oh, this looks like it's going to be a doozy. Like, it just looks like it's going to be bad. And I don't remember the names of like any of the characters because they're Chinese, and look, you remember me trying to remember the names to the B&A characters that I've been rattling about forever. So you know I can't keep track of names, but these characters, especially, I just called him the Fat Immortal when I was talking to my brother about this movie we watched. I just kept calling him the Fat Immortal because he's literally just this giant, jiggly, immortal guy. And again, the fact that he's like rotund is an implied joke because like he's just jiggly. And you take a look at him, and when he's one of the first characters you meet in this movie, you immediately go, what is this movie? What is this going to be? Garbage. This is going to be fart jokes and just complete stupidity all the way through. And that does come up, which is why it feels so close to being a bad movie. I should tell you what it's about. It's based on Chinese folklore that I am not familiar with. There is some sort of demon pill and some sort of what was the other one called? Not a demon pill. Spirit pill or something like that. Spirit something. This monster was split into these two pills, basically like a good side and a bad side, right? And they got locked away until some prophecy or something needed to be filled. I don't understand the folklore. But this evilness, this evil demon entity and this good spirit entity are locked away in these pills. Fast forward some time, they get released on the world, because of course they do, right? And the story takes place centered around the embodiment of this evil pill. You've got these two immortals that are competing with each other to try to become a golden immortal. I don't know what the difference is. I don't know. But they're competing a bit. And the antagonist immortal releases these pills onto the world and leaves the protagonist immortal to take care of the demon pill that has infused itself into the newborn child of this like Japanese lord's family, right? They just have this baby and it's been infused with this demon pill, and this protagonist immortal has to look after them. And the story centers around that child, which is named Neja, which is the name of the movie, right? Whereas the antagonist immortal has taken the spirit pill for his own benefit, brought it to these underworld dragons that have been locked away, and they have a newborn dragon that they infuse with the spirit pill that will grow up to become like the next savior of the planet. But like the roles are reversed, right? So you've got the evil side, the antagonists looking after who's supposed to be the good guy, and you have all the protagonists looking after who was supposed to be the bad guy but won't be. So you've got this sort of like, I don't know if it's supposed to be yin yang or what it's supposed to be, but it centers around that. You meet when you see I don't know how to get over. You have to see Neja after he's born, and they bring this bundle of this newborn infant to the Lord, like, oh, your wife's given birth to the baby. Come look at the baby. And in this bundle where there's supposed to be a baby, looks like just like a freaking egg, just a giant egg. And then the Lord's like looking at it like, what is this? And then these eyes just plop out of the egg. I don't know how to explain it. They're just there suddenly. And this horrible freaking grin shows up. And the baby just becomes a demon baby, right? Like transformation, something like if you've seen The Incredibles, the first one, when Jack just goes all flame on. It's like that, but as a small egg baby becoming a small demon baby instead. This movie, I can't explain to you my first impression of it. I had no idea where this thing was going to go. And it's funny because the further into the movie you go, I'm not going to dive too much into the details because I kind of just have to recommend this movie. You just need to see it. There's so much that happens in this movie that I can't even tell you where to begin. But your first impression, if it's anything like mine, you're going to think this is going to be rough. Like, I was not thrilled with my first impression of this movie. It starts and I'm like, this is going to be horrible. But there's a lot going on, and the further in the movie you get, that there's a lot of deep lore, a lot of Chinese folklore that this is based on. The movie doesn't give you a lot of context for as a viewer, you can kind of pick up, like, I kind of get what's happening, if not really why. Like, the deeper lore context of why things are the way they are. Just that they're that way because they're that way. Like, there's this curse on Neja after he's born, that because he's got the demon pill, the fat immortal explains to the Lord's family that he only has 3 years to live, because the curse on the demon pill is that whoever it embodies will be struck by lightning and destroyed in 3 years. I don't know why. We never see that curse placed. That comes out of frickin' nowhere. That is just a line of dialogue that this immortal explains. Like, he's going to be shot by lightning in 3 years. So we might as well kill off the demon baby now before he becomes a demon and, like, destroys the planet. But the Lord's family's like, no, we have to protect him. He's our baby. He's our child. We're going to look after him. We're going to raise him, which turned out to be the right move, right? And this kid grows up super fast because we get a time skip later by like 1 year. This kid has to be like a year old, but he's behaving and walking around and moving and talking and interacting like a small child would. I don't know. I place it at somewhere around 4, 5, 6, something like that. And you will, by the end of the movie, go through all 3 of the years that he's going to be alive for. And he doesn't know that he's got a deadline, basically. He doesn't know he's got a deadline. He just thinks he's a normal child with superhuman powers, basically, because he knows he's got super strength and speed and sometimes uncontrollable firepower, but he's trying to live like a regular child because that's what the Lord's family is trying to raise him as. But he's been separated from the rest of this Japanese village that they live in because everyone's terrified of him, because when he was born, he literally almost burned down the entire village, which was the scene we saw from the trailer, where when he was born, he just started throwing fire into the village and almost destroyed the whole thing, but was subdued. They managed to put this sort of golden necklace around him. It's like a chain link type situation, and it subdues his powers and keeps him from like losing control, or at least helps in that manner, but he's still super strong and superhuman. And the father spends most of his time in those 3 years trying to find ways to basically end that curse in some way. So he's away from the home a lot, and the mom is always away from the home, apparently fighting demons. You don't see it much in the movie because the movie centers mostly around Neja, but apparently just fighting demons in the world is just a regular occurrence. Apparently, you don't see a lot of it. You do meet one water demon later. There's this fight scene. Oh my god. You have to watch this fight scene with this water demon between Neja and the dragon, the good spirit dragon child that I mentioned earlier, that the antagonist immortal raises. They're raising him to be a savior of the world, so he's like a hero, and Neja's not having it. They get into a fight, and they get in a fight with this water demon. This water demon is straight up out of an anime, right? Just kind of serious powers. Like this water demon wants to eat children, will eat people, very evil, very dark idea, but also is just incredibly stupid and bumbling. And at one point, his superpower is that he blows bubbles that if you touch them and they pop, you start turning into stone. It's the most anime thing I've seen out of an animated movie lately that wasn't already an anime. Oh my gosh. And it's ridiculous how they resolve that. They basically just slap him on the wrist and say, don't ever do that again. After they beat him up, he starts groveling like, oh, please don't, I don't know, murder me or whatever. And they're like, okay, we won't, but don't do it again. It's so silly. He about ate a child and then they just let him go. And it's the most serious movie. There are so many serious topics about family, about loss, about about Neja trying to make a connection with the people of his village, but everyone's afraid of him. There's so many serious topics that kind of come up. The end of the world, fulfilling a fate or a prophecy or your destiny type thing. There's a lot of serious concepts, but then so many of the characters are just goofy as heck all the time. And then it just flip-flops back and forth 180s to being goofy to serious to goofy to serious. I was getting whiplash watching this thing. Like, I didn't know how seriously to take any of it. which meant for the most part I tried to take it not seriously, but every time they were trying to be serious, then it was hard for me to like empathize with it. But this was a movie that comes out, and I don't know anything about it. I've never heard about this movie, and I'm like, this movie couldn't have gone over well. I don't know where it came from. There's no way it did well. There's no way it's been successful. At the end of the movie, it has this kind of like little cliffhanger situation, just a little bit. The main story is wrapped up, but there's this sort of cliffhanger that hints at a sequel. And I'm like, oh, that's hilarious. There's no way they're ever going to get a sequel for this absurd movie. Did some research on this movie. You got to watch this movie because it's a trip. But I did some research. This movie was very popular. Again, I forgot while I was judging this movie like crazy, I forgot that it's not a Western movie. It was Chinese, filled with Chinese sort of in jokes and folklore, that this movie wasn't made for me, really, as you know, primarily with me in mind. It did amazingly well. I forget what I read that the budget was for this movie, but it ended up making like $700-something million back. It's this huge movie. Apparently, it's the largest grossing animated movie of all time outside of an American studio, like as an international studio. I forget what the record actually was, but suffice it to say, it won tons of awards, made tons of money, and is actually really well renowned. This movie came out last year. It was a 2019 movie. I didn't know when it came out. It was a 2019 movie. It came out last year. Apparently, there's a sequel for it. Is it in the works or has it come out? I actually don't know. I can try to look it up real quick. I think, you know what? I can't see it. I don't know. I'll have to do more research, but I think there's a sequel in the works. Maybe something like that. So when I was making fun of it with my friends, like, this movie's so terrible, it's not going to get a sequel. Haha, that ending was silly. I think they're working on a sequel. But you just, it's wild. It's a wild ride. If you're into animated movies, especially computer animated, do the CGI thing. It's really interesting to see this art style, but animated well. It's an art style that when I saw it, I immediately thought, oh yeah, this is terrible. This is cheap. It wasn't a cheap movie. They spent like 20-something million on it or something. It looked like a cheap style. This is going to be a bad movie. But it's actually animated well. And my brain didn't know how to handle it. The dub, I will say, the voice acting for the dub is a bit rough. That took me a lot to get over, especially with the two immortal characters. The fat immortal has a mumbling issue where sometimes I just don't understand what he's saying. I just don't get it. Like, if you really try to hear and you have better ears than me, you're probably fine, but it just doesn't match the volume of anybody else in the movie, and it bothers me to no end. It's not so obvious that it's like clearly bad, but it bothers me. And the evil immortal, the antagonist one, he's got a stutter, and it's there on purpose. It's probably there in the Chinese as well, but because they're trying to match the lips as close as they can in the dub, sometimes the stutter is there, the speech impediment, whatever it is, the stutter is there, and sometimes it's like almost not there. So there's a little bit of a whiplash there where it's like, does he have a stutter, does he not? There's this whole scene where his stutter is super exaggerated for a joke, but it's at the beginning of the movie, and before you even realize he has a stutter, because you see him once, and he says some words, but he doesn't talk enough to know he has a stutter, and then the next time you see him, he does a lot of talking, and his stutter is so pronounced that you don't know what's happening. It sounds like he's just stopping mid-sentence for no reason. Like, you don't know why. And then after that scene, when you see him talk more, it's not supposed to be a joke, because the exaggerated scene was, he was trying to say, like, if he was going to say, I will not help you, or something like that, he would just stop mid-sentence, I will not help you. And it's like, what is this pausing? What is happening? And in the Chinese, I bet it was supposed to be a funnier joke, but in the English, it was just weird. But then later, after that scene, when they're not trying to make a joke out of it anymore, when he talks, you hear the stutter sometimes, but it's just kind of weird. It just doesn't fit because you've already kind of had your impression of this guy, and it's such a confusing swing that it took me a minute to figure out what this guy was about. So the voice acting is just kind of weird, just in general, especially between those two. And there's some hiccups with some of the other characters as well, but it's not too bad, but it is something to keep in mind that you have to kind of get over, that it's not in English naturally, so it is dubbed over. It doesn't sound like English. It doesn't sound like it's not spoken by an English speaker. It's just the sort of delivery. It's the delivery of it, because the pacing in the Chinese is probably a little different from the pacing had it been Western originally. So that's something to keep in mind. But beyond a couple of the nitpicks, it's a weird ride. I'll tell you this. If you're going to watch the movie, walk into it with the expectation to not take it seriously. Treat it like it's silly, and you'll have more fun with it, as opposed to if you walk in hoping for like an artistic film, a cinema experience or something like that, then you're probably going to walk away disappointed. Like, that's kind of what I walked into this as a little bit, like trying to take the movie seriously, like maybe I would a Disney movie or something. But if you walk into it not to take it seriously, if you walk into it to have a good time, maybe you'll find some laughs out of it. Especially considering just how big it actually was internationally, that by far makes it more interesting to me. That it must have really spoken to an international audience. And that was Neja. And that's how I spent my day the other day when my friend came up from out of state. So that's about all I got. I got no outro for these things. You may have noticed that I took a couple of days off of the podcast the other day. I didn't mention this in yesterday's podcast because I wasn't sure that I was going to do it yet. I'm giving myself a 2-day buffer. So instead of me recording the podcast on one morning and then putting that up immediately the next morning, I'm giving myself a 2-day buffer instead of a 1-day buffer to try to help me get back on track with doing this daily, so that when hiccups happen and I lose a day, I don't lose a day of releasing a video. All I have to do is basically record 2 episodes in a morning or an afternoon or whatever instead of 1. And that way I can kind of keep up with it in case some things happen, my schedule changes and that kind of thing. But if you didn't notice that, no big deal. If you did notice it, that's probably why. You've been listening to a Hasty Podcast. That's all the time I have this morning for the podcast. I want to thank you all so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please consider doing all the things, whatever they may be. Whatever you're listening to, follow the podcast or like the podcast or whatever you can do on the platform that you're listening to this on. I have a Patreon, if you would like to check that out at patreon.com/Weston Hasty. I have an Anchor page as well at anchor.fm/Hasty Podcast, where you can also support the podcast. I don't know why I forgot the word podcast there for a minute. I have a Twitter. Hit me up at Weston Hasty on Twitter. You can tweet at me and hit me up with questions or comments about today's podcast or any of the others, and I may include them in future podcasts if it's a question that might be worth discussing or just an observation or whatever it might be. But once again, thank you all so much for listening. This has been a Hasty Podcast. Until next time, I'm out of here. Bye.